So back when I started film photography, there was a lot of recommendations out there, and there's a lot of different gear pieces and film stocks and all of this stuff, and it was all a bit overwhelming. And so I wanted to make a video that was just my recommendations for a beginner that wanted to start shooting film. And so really, film photography is a lot simpler than digital photography in the regards of gear. And so there are three main things I'm going to go through, and that's the camera, the lens, and the film stock. So first of all, the camera. Now, I would recommend going for a full SLR, full manual SLR, something that's going to be a little bit, give you a little more control. But some people don't like how big and heavy they are and the lenses that accompany them. And so if you're one of those people, a point and shoot might be the better option. You're not going to get as much control over your settings, and you're not going to be able to specifically pick and choose what you want to do as much as you would with a full manual SLR, which just gives you so much more flexibility. If you know what you want to do, you can tell the camera to do it, and you'll just get the result that you wanted. And so that's a little bit easier if you know exactly what you want, and you can just put it in the camera and get it. And so a point and shoot can be a little bit harder because it has the auto exposure and autofocus systems, and they're tied to one point usually, and so it's just sometimes a little bit difficult to work around that if you know what you want. But it might be a trade-off worth making if you really want the compact size and just the easy carry of a point and shoot. And on the inverse side of that, it does make for a simpler shooting experience, especially if you don't know what you're doing. It's just going to be easier to just point and take a photo. So if you're just getting into film photography, a point and shoot might be a really good starting point, but I would still recommend an SLR if you're willing to carry around the size and weight, just because you have more room to grow as far as getting into a lens system and being able to go out and buy more lenses for the camera you already have. Whereas with a point and shoot, you're kind of just locked into what you get. One of the great things is these cameras are pretty cheap. I got my full manual SLR, my Spotmatic SP, for I think less than $50 on eBay. And so you can get point and shoots for equally cheap, or probably way less if you buy them locally rather than online. And so you can probably just own both if you really wanted to. And if you are gonna go for a point and shoot, I would recommend a fixed lens rather than a zoom lens, just because in my experience, the quality is so much nicer. My favorite point and shoot film camera is my Canon SureShot Max, and I love that thing. It's I believe it's a 38mm f3.5 lens, and I really like the lens off of that. It's not too wide, and so it's kind of a nice focal length, but f3.5 is wide enough as well. And also the optics on it are just really sharp, so it resolves a ton of detail. So the next thing is just the lenses, and this is more if you buy an SLR rather than point and shoot, so you can kind of disregard this, but some of this might be worth keeping in mind when you look for a point and shoot as well. So when you buy a full manual SLR, one thing to think about is the lens mount on it. Personally, I really like the M42 lens mount because it's just super versatile, and there's so many great lenses for it. And so this could be the Takumars, the Helios lenses. I mean, really, there's just a lot of great options. And the Canon FD lineup is also great from what I've seen as well. And I would also recommend buying your lenses locally in thrift stores and such, because you can get them for pretty cheap if you buy them locally, and this is a great way to experiment as well. So if you really don't know what you want in a lens yet, and you're not coming from the digital system, you've never really used a camera much before, I would recommend looking for either a 35mm lens or a 50mm lens. 35 is going to be a little bit wider, and 50 is going to be a little bit longer, but both are quite usable for most things. If you're looking for something that has a very similar field of view to your smartphone camera, I would look at a 24mm lens, as that would be a lot closer. But personally, I prefer 35 because it's still plenty wide enough in my opinion, but it's also a little bit longer to give you more options as far as what you can do with it. And the great thing is, because these lenses are generally pretty affordable, you can buy a fairly cheap 35mm lens, and maybe you think it's too wide, maybe you think it's too long, and then you can go and start experimenting with other lenses and refining exactly what you want from there. When it comes to the aperture of the lenses, I would say f2 is plenty good enough. The great thing about having something a little bit wider like that is that you can get an ISO 200 film stock and still just barely get away with it at a 30th or 60th of a second in low light conditions. Whereas if you had an f3.5 or f4 lens, you might struggle a little bit more, because that could be the difference between a 15th of a second and a 30th of a second, and a 30th of a second is much more usable in low light conditions for a lot of things. So the next big thing is just the film stocks you're shooting. If you just want some basic recommendations based on what you want to shoot with, here are a few that I can give you. Now there's Ektar 100, which is not too expensive, but it's really great for outdoor bright conditions. Kodak Gold and Color Plus are pretty similar, but I would recommend the cheaper one if you can find it. Those are great film stocks to start at, especially Kodak Color Plus. That's the film stock that I used to shoot a lot of when I started shooting film. It's probably the film stock I've shot the most of ever. Now if you have the budget and you want to do a little bit more professional shooting, or you have a need for even higher quality images, I would recommend Portra 800, and this is going to give you excellent low light properties as well. So this is just a really great film stock if it's darker out too. But just be aware that it is a bit more expensive, so it's probably not something you're going to be able to shoot a ton of. And the last recommendation I can give is that if you're on a budget, you really should try shooting black and white film. Black and white film is going to be significantly cheaper than a lot of the color film stocks out there, especially something like Pan 100. That's one of my favorite film stocks from as far as black and white goes, is Pan 100, and you can get that for 36 exposures for pretty cheap. If you're looking for something with a little bit more speed, I would try Pan 400, as that's also pretty great. So that's all I have for you today. Hopefully this video has been helpful. Any professionals that have been shooting film for a long time, let me know your thoughts down in the comments and what you would recommend to beginners, so that more people can see what are some great starting points. Otherwise, that's all I have for you today, so have a great day and happy shooting.